Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Sunday's Coming podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Kaleb.
Hello.
And my friend, Phil. Phil, I am very, very, very happy to finally have you here. We tried to do this in May at Philo when you were here. And then we realized we had like double and triple booked the podcast studio. And we were like, let's do this another time. And so now 4 or 5 months later, we're here. So thanks for coming up and enjoying.
Honored to be here, guys.
Actually quite warm Chicago
you got to spend some time in the city, right?
I got 2 days in Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
With my wife here, and we got to celebrate our anniversary and her birthday.
Oh, that's
And
fun.
It was a blast.
Right. That's awesome.
I've been to Chicago a couple times, but this was her first experience.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
it is. Well, and we were talking before we started recording, like so many amazing restaurants down there.
I feel like Chicago's a little bit underrated, honestly. But I'm saying that knowing that I was there for the 4-month window where it's nice. And so it might be a little bit overrated the other months.
It definitely is. It's one of the, people come here and live here for the summer months and they go, this is amazing. This is why I live here. I feel really good. And then come, I don't know, a month and a half from now, we go, Actually, I would say up until Christmas.
Yeah. It's usually
up until Christmas is great.
January,
and then
February.
January, you're like, okay.
You tolerate it.
I'm kind of done now. And then February comes around.
And it gets even colder.
And March comes around. And the April comes and it's still cold. Mm-hmm. And we're like, okay, I don't like this very much anymore. But, that's why spring break is around. And
that's right.
When I first realized, even in college, spring break, I'm like, oh, yay. But I'm like, it's in March. I'm like, there's no spring anywhere. This is not it. So, anyways.
So top moment of your weekend adventure in Chicago, if you had to pick one thing.
Oh, man.
All the people that are listening that are going to come to Chicago someday, you would recommend they do what?
Stay downtown and just walk around.
Yeah.
I mean, we lost track of how many times we're like, oh, take a picture of that. It's just gorgeous. Mm-hmm. We did the architecture tour.
Oh, good.
So I had done that before and loved it again. I mean, it's so cool to be able to do that early in your trip if you do it, because you kind of get a little bit of a lay of the land. Mm-hmm. But what is it? All Cheval?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, best burger, dude.
Goodness. The burger, but get the chicken appetizer.
I've never had that.
Kaleb.
What is it?
It's just chicken appetizer.
Okay.
And that's what it's called on the menu?
I don't know what it's called. Matt Wright, our mutual friend, said, get the chicken. And he was correct. That was unbelievable.
I think I've only had the bone marrow appetizer there, which is, it comes out. And if you've never had bone marrow, it's amazing. And it's, people say it's like God's butter, because it basically tastes like a super, amazingly cooked ribeye, but the cap of the ribeye that's super crispy fat is basically that. It sounds probably disgusting as I'm describing it, but you scrape it off this bone onto a piece of toast that they give you, and they give you some it's almost like a fig jam or something like that to go with it, and it's unreal. But it grosses people out.
Whoever's doing the branding, though, for bone marrow, it might be time for a rebrand.
Yeah. Like caviar.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't just say what it is. It has a fancy name.
Yeah.
That's actually a good point.
Yeah.
I never thought about that for caviar. I've actually never had caviar. We should do that sometime.
Maybe. You have caviar and bone marrow. Same meal.
It's just not something that I'm like, I gotta have it.
Oh,
but
I'm
sure that I would like it. I feel like I really would. I like a lot of weird, obscure stuff like that. So anyways. Next time you're there, bone marrow.
Next time.
It's fantastic.
All right.
Well, I'm glad you guys got to hang out down here and enjoy Chicago, because it was beautiful this weekend.
Sure was. But pumped to be here with you guys. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. So let's see. We were together in Atlanta. We hung out, and you were, I can't remember. Well, I guess you lived there.
I lived there at that point, yeah.
And now you are no longer in Atlanta and have moved to Kentucky.
Yes.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Easier airport to get in and out of.
Oh my goodness. Sure is.
And you guys are about to build a house down there and have some property. And I watched the video of you guys as kids, realizing, oh my gosh, we're going to live here. And it was it was so cool. I love that. As parents to be able to do something like that.
Shared like a true marketing person.
Yes.
I guess.
And then it's now it's just an ad for Enjoy Kentucky or something like that. Kentucky.org or .gov. But that's awesome, man. And so you guys, well, I guess going back to when you were in Atlanta and when I first met you, you were the communications director at Westridge Church.
Yeah, it started as communications director, and then for the longer period there was creative arts pastor, overseeing all worship production, video and comm, and everything like that. So yeah, had a run of 12 great years there, and still super connected.
Yeah,
there, love that church and that community.
That's a long time.
It's a long time, longer than
long time.
I thought when I first moved to Westridge, to Atlanta. It's like hopefully at least 3 years. That would be great, because that's kind of the standard that you see and hear from any role, it seems like. And so to get through that and to be able to just, pour roots into that community and that church was really special.
Well, to dive into sort of like the deep end of content right away, like what would you say were the factors that allowed you to stay for so long and have such a longevity there when, as you just mentioned, like a lot of roles, that's just not reality. There's 3 years, 1 year, 5 years is like a long time in a lot of these cases.
I mean, a lot of factors. I think for me, the thing that I look back to is it didn't take long to get a sense of, hey, this is not a perfect place, but this is a healthy church trying to be healthy. Yeah. And to me, a healthy church is a church that is dysfunctional and knows it, and is trying to get healthy.
It's great.
And so I call that healthiness. And the biggest thing is the character of our pastor and our leadership, who I got to work really closely with over the years. That was just unmatched. And I got sick of seeing friends bail, go to other churches, bigger churches, more appealing, whatever, and then get pushed right out or have to leave because it wasn't healthy, or because they couldn't trust the character of who they were working with and leading with. And so for me, it wasn't ever about being a part of the biggest thriving church, even though it was in a lot of way, it fit a lot of that criteria. It just wasn't something I wanted to chase. I just wanted to chase building being a part of building a community that would put Jesus on display. And it was really awesome to be able to see it grow and be a part of that for years.
I love saying, being dysfunctional, and they know it, because I think every church is dysfunctional. I think most organizations and, just in general are
Humans,
very dysfunctional.
maybe?
Humans in general are very dysfunctional. And so it's just calling out and go, hey, we know we're. Well,
it's just like in your personal life, if you can't identify the things that you need to work on or that need addressed, then you can never take the appropriate steps to address them. So to extrapolate that out to a church, and like the humility of leadership to be able to say that and name that and say, hey, like this is okay. It's okay to be in this place, and then to intentionally pursue getting better together.
It's been fascinating watching, being a part of the creative community of the church for so long. You get to meet a lot of people all across the country, and in the scope of the kind of work I get to do now, I mean, I have people all the time say, hey, how many healthy churches are out there? And they're thinking like, is it 1 and 2, 1 and 3? And honestly, that number is kind of, it's hard to share, because there's just, because people are involved. There's no perfect leader. There's no perfect church. And the pressure to be all things to all people creates a lot of dysfunction. It just does. Yeah. But the more I've, when I felt that initially, I was like, man, this is frustrating. I wish they were more healthy. Yeah. But I think the more that I am a part of the church, it makes me realize, like, if there was the perfect healthy church, would we need Jesus as much as we do, as we truly do? Because then it would be like, oh, I just want to be a part of that place. I want to get in there. And really, I think, God's track record is always to use jacked up people like us to build something way better and way bigger, because we can't do it on our own.
It is still God's plan for us as people to work in churches and to be the church for the rest of the world to understand who he is. And today and, every day I feel like I'm reading something where some leader messed up and made a mistake, and it is breaking my heart to watch the church have to go through things like that. And because the dysfunction is on display, and the bigger churches, and the larger they are, whatever it is, they just have a more and higher tendency to be, on display even louder for the world to see. And social media doesn't help that. And it sucks because it's just filled with a bunch of broken people, and whether they say they are broken or not. And so,
well, that becomes the biggest problem, is when they try to then put on the sort of facade that they're not.
Correct.
And that's where the disconnect really happens. And It's tough.
Yeah, we could talk a whole.
Yeah.
At some point, I had told Brian Taylor when we were with him a couple weeks ago, he needs to be on Talk About Church Hurt. And I think he's going to come on at some point, and because he's got
4-part
lots
episode.
of feisty things to say about that, and so I'm excited for that. So going back to Westridge, when you were the communications director first, and then turned into the creative arts pastor.
Correct.
So what was that transition like for you? My initial thought is you went from being a peer to then overseeing the peers that you were, or that you were originally working with. What was that transition like? Like, I guess that was the main part of your stint at the church was, that role.
I mean, honestly, the way that God worked in that is I was stepping up into that role. There was already a lot of rebuilding happening. The worship pastor was going to plant a church. Production was kind of transitioning as well too. So it was a fresh chance for a rebuild.
Yeah.
So the rebuild was less around. I mean, it started with people because it always does, but really it started with purpose before. And the most fun part of, like, I'm a builder by nature, so I love taking something from where it is to where it could be and dreaming through those steps and figuring out how we can get there. And the biggest thing was moving from coming in, trying to figure out how do we move from a Sunday ministry to a central ministry. And because there were, I have moments that I think about of a incredible drummer in kids ministry that nobody knew about, because there was no connection to what was happening. Seeing the younger generation leaders not have a pipeline, and seeing ministries that mattered so much to the families of the church that may not have the same experience as what you'd have on a Sunday, in our main services and stuff. Yeah. So a lot of the rebuild was figuring out, here's where we're going, and then getting to actually build and hire a team around that, because it was just at a natural point to be able to rebuild staff. So some of the greatest years of my ministry journey were in those first years, because we were all just leaned into building something differently in a way that really served our whole church. And that it was so special. And God brought us so many incredible people that were connected to the church at that point, and also some that weren't, to build a team that, I mean, we had some fun, no doubt, but we really made some meaningful ministry happen in those years and stuff. So it was a special time.
That's awesome, man. And then you were there for 12 years. And then when you left in 21?
Basically 22.
Okay.
At the very beginning of 22 was fresh start. Yeah.
That's crazy, man. Yeah. I remember that transition. I remember talking to you even pre-transition and just going, is this something that we're going to do? It's a very large jump out of ministry.
Yep.
When I met you in 2019, we had both basically joined the Slingshot team within a couple of months of each other.
Yep.
Me, you, Brian Taylor. You guys went on to do much greater things than I there, but it was cool to see just like this growth and even the communications lane that you really jumped into and helped lead, especially through COVID. It was fantastic growth to see. And then for you to be able to jump out and go, hey, I'm going to do something else and step out of ministry full time. Yeah. And then in the middle of all of that and being on staff and, joining the Slingshot team, you released a book. I guess this is pre you joining, but right after
around that same time. Though.
Right after you finished the book.
That was right before COVID, which was fun.
Yeah, dude.
You're like, all the things I just wrote in this book now up in smoke.
No, actually, it was the opposite. It was, how did you know this was coming? Because it was
well, look at you.
Kind of God's timing.
Nice.
Yeah. It was an area that needed some rethinking.
Yeah.
And so it was really
maybe
God's
talk
timing.
about that a little bit. Like, what were you kind of going through or wrestling with or thinking about that led you to kind of those ideas and those themes that eventually became the book?
Well, when I started in ministry, I looked around to say, who can I look up to? Who can I model ministry after? Especially in your young 20s, you don't know what you're doing. Like, you have hopefully the heart for doing things the right way, but you're trying to figure out what that even looks like.
Yep.
And so I was looking out for what are the communication resources, what are the creative ministry resources that help you know how to get on the right track. And there really wasn't any. And so when I look back at my first year and a half, 2 years of ministry, it was not like the book that I would write would be very different because it was rough. It was on my way to burnout. It was reactive, not proactive. It was all these things that I kind of just settled into. And I got a glimpse of what it looked like if you aren't intentional about how you lead yourself and how you lead a ministry. And it's rough because I had moments, looking around like, am I going to make it here? Can I do this?
Yeah.
And it really took some, intentional changes in that moment to say, like, I don't want to be a part of that burnout statistic. I don't want to be another one of those people that is there for a year and a half, 2 years and has to bail and leave. So, God did a lot of things in that, in that season that really helped me rethink leadership, rethink ministry, and then in turn, rethink communication.
Yeah.
And it was less around the tactics and it was more about approach. It was more about posture. It was more about how I approach these things. And I just got to see the light bulb turn on for me and for others. And that really sparked the book because the longer that went, the more sharpened my, ideas around communication strategy and about creative ministry strategy. And it started getting some attention as well of like, okay, it's working. Tell us how.
Yeah.
And so I never, I had always wanted to write a book, but not for selling a lot of copies because I didn't think it would.
Yeah.
But it was to sharpen the last 10% of what I thought was clear but wasn't.
Yeah.
And to force myself to do that. And nothing does that like the painful process of writing.
Yes.
So doing that was a labor of love, but it was just more of like a bucket list thing of I just want to be able to put this out there more than anything for me.
Yeah.
But hopefully it helps somebody.
Yeah.
And God just put his hand on it, I think, in a lot of ways, because it hit the right time, for when a lot of people were looking for something. But, even to this day, I still get emails often every week, definitely every month, of somebody that has been impacted by it. So I'm just blown away by how it's worked. Yeah.
Maybe let's dig into that a little bit more, where you mentioned a second ago, just shifting your approach or your mindset towards it. Like, give us an example. Like, what was one of those early things as you were a young leader kind of transitioning into some of these new approaches that sort of clicked for you and actually had a lot of impact in how you were able to lead?
Yeah, we could talk the rest of the combo just on that, but a couple are like, when I was hitting that burnout stage of like, oh no, what am I going to do? I had this moment sitting in my office and I remember it just felt like I had a stack of papers on my desk that, as soon as I would finish one thing, something else would be waiting there for me. There was no end in sight. And I was just looking around like, who's going to do something about this? Like, who's going to notice that I am drowning, in all this stuff? Who's going to do something about all this stuff? And it was like, God just had to lovingly, graciously kick me in the butt and just say, hey, I don't know. I thought that's why I brought you here. And, it hit me of like, okay, this isn't somebody else's job. This is actually my job to be able to step in and be able to say, like, it's my job to lead. It's my job God didn't bring me here to burn out, but God did require me to be able to step up and be a good steward of the leadership that he wanted to give me. And it started with leading myself well. Yeah. And it was more of the concept of, I have to play offense, not defense. And I was in a very reactive rhythm of my schedule, of my work, of my ministry, all those things. And I was far more a service department than a ministry. And so it took leading myself well before letting everybody else do it for me. It took proactive approach to everything versus reactive. It took simple things like actually owning and managing my calendar. Yeah. And saying, okay, I'm not going to just always be available. I need to actually block off the most important things that I do. And then on the communication side specifically, so much of my role was focused on how do I make the staff happy? How do I make sure that I'm, I like to be liked. Everybody does. But so how do I say yes, even at the cost of me? Or how do I say yes, even though it's not effective communication for our church? And so for me, it was it was stepping into our worship center and looking at the stage and knowing the weight that I felt of the stage, of feeling like everybody wants attention right up there. But my eyes were just drawn towards the back row. And I was thinking, like, if I can't advocate for that person that's coming in for the first time, if all I'm doing is trying to make staff happy. Yeah. So it just took that shift and rethinking of, my job as a communications leader, my job as helping craft and lead messaging is to be an advocate for my audience, not just an advocate for the staff member that's upset because they wanted the pastor to preach something for them to get more people to their event. Doesn't mean that those things both can't happen, but it takes I have to focus on the person in the back row with their arms crossed.
Yeah.
And if I can reach them effectively, that's what's going to help us rethink how we communicate everything.
So 2 things. The first is like communications, I think production, honestly, any central ministry in a church tends to be this, I'm a service person for you.
Yep.
And to the point where if for me in production, it was submit a ticket, I'll fix it later. IT did the same thing. For comms, it was like, you want a graphic made, submit a ticket, use this Google form, whatever it is. We'll promote your ministry on Facebook, whatever event that you're doing for your MOPS thing that you want people to show up to.
Picking on MOPS.
MOPS. Thursday mornings at 9.
Oh yeah.
I think, and then the other thing is like pleasing your staff to do that and leading yourself to realize, this isn't, I'm not just here just to only serve them. That's a very,
how did those conversations go? Like, what was it like to sort of educate and cast that vision and kind of turn that corner a little bit?
Because that's a 180.
Yeah.
It's a 180 and it didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
You have to, I'm always reminded with culture change is think about how long it took for that culture to get to that point. And often it's not days or months, it's years.
Yeah.
Don't be foolish enough to think that you're going to have a staff meeting or read a book and overnight you're going to create culture change. It's going to take some time for culture to become behavior. So I was reminded by that, but I was blown away by how quickly that started to happen. And I think like a couple of examples where, we've all had in any kind of ministry, production, communications, really anything in the creative space, you often feel like a vending machine. You feel like, okay, I need to go through you to get this done. What do I do? And so one little shift I started to just make is if a ministry was knocking on the door saying, hey, I know you're busy, but otherwise meaning I need you to get to this right away. So it would be, hey, let's schedule a time and let's talk about it. I would love to hear about it. Yeah. And I had to remind myself knowing that I want every person that knocks on my door to feel passionate about their ministry. And I don't want to rob them of the joy that it is to be passionate about their ministry. And I don't want to be the turd in the punch bowl as well for them to say, I've got to go through them. No, I want to meet them as a partner, not just as a service provider. Yeah. And then when I get together in a meeting like that, often they want to come and say, hey, I need this, this, and this. Yeah. And so I just starting meetings like, instead of saying, what's your laundry list of things you want? Say, hey, I want to make sure we walk away from this meeting knowing that you got a plan for how we can make partner together to get your thing done. But can I start just with saying, hey, what's on your heart for this event? What's your vision for your ministry right now that we can help lean into with you? And creating a partnership type of relationship with them instead of service provider. Yeah. And so many times it would take that person that was coming in kind of guns a-blazing, with their arms folded like, I got to do this.
Their
to
physical posture,
to be able to share vision, to share stories about what God's doing in the event that they're trying to promote. And that posture created so many opportunities to actually dream with them and not squash their dreams or tell them no, but actually say, hey, I've got some ideas about how we can actually do that. When you start dreaming with them, instead, like you get culture change because you're now adding value to them and you're in it together instead of just they have to go through you.
They feel like you're for them. Yeah. You're not just the gatekeeper of communication from the stage, from social media, from whatever. Yeah. You're actually you're there to actually serve, the team. One of the things you said too that I think is super important that I had your book out and I was poking through some stuff and I remember you talking about your chaos cycle, which is essentially what you're just describing now, which is the burnout and leading yourself to realize, this actually starts with me. And I think so many people, especially in ministry, look at their roles and they go, my church is doing this to me. Yep. My church has given me this stack of papers, this laundry list of everything that I have to do. And the reality is that doesn't mean that it's not God's purpose for you in this season of ministry or doing this role or whatever, or that you're not called to doing that. But you have to learn how to lead yourself to actually do that better. And it's not the church that's hurting you because you don't know how to manage your calendar or your to-do list or how to function and organize your life to be able to do that. And I mean, gosh, I think of myself in so many different seasons where I'm like, why was that so bad? And I go, I was leading myself horribly by, not being able to, keep track of my calendar or to leave it open for anybody to book stuff and not building in margin because meetings on my calendar mean I'm busy, which means I'm working.
Yep.
And when you don't have meetings, and especially in church, people go, what are you doing all day?
My job.
My job. My job.
The thing I actually need to do.
Yeah. So anyways, it's a long roundabout way to say like that chaos cycle, I think, is in so many people in so many different departments and areas of ministry and other organizations too. But learning how to do that, all of a sudden the burnout conversation is just different because you're like, oh, I see this in a different way. I'm not looking at this as my senior pastor is giving me all this crap to do and I have to do it tomorrow.
Well, I mean, there's going to be chaos seasons.
Yeah, of course.
Christmas is not going to get any more chill. There's a lot going on in people's families and their lives in general, and especially if you're working in creative ministry or any kind of ministry. It's going to be crazy, but it's scary when it goes from a season to a cycle. When Sunday's coming and you are not ready, where you are constantly getting the end of the week emails or things because you're in a reactive rhythm of chaos, on that. That's where you got to step up and try to lead in a healthy way. And it's chess, not checkers. It's not going to just happen overnight. Again, it's going to take some strategy of leading yourself well before you can lead others well. Yeah. But yeah, it's worth it because if you do that, if you're leading yourself well, if you're leading your ministry well, and it's still chaos to the cost of it's impacting your family beyond how it should, or impacting your ministry in a dysfunctional or even toxic way. Yeah. That's how you can step out and release yourself of that role to be able to know, okay, I did all that I could. I was faithful with what God gave me. Maybe there's something else out there for me that I need to be faithful in taking a step of obedience out. But often what happens is when it doesn't go well, we just say, it's the church's problem. Somebody else didn't do it for me. And I think we miss that, and that may be true. It may be true in some situations, but I think what we miss is the things that God wants to grow and stretch us into in that chaos to be able to maybe prepare us for what's next. And it takes us being faithful, not in just the good moments, but in every moment to be able to say, God, I'm going to do the best I can with what I have right in this moment and be able to be faithful and let you bear the fruit. Because that's what God's going to do. We can't, on our best day, we can't bear the fruit. That's not our job. That's his job. Yeah.
That makes me think of like the idea of the chaos cycle. And if you had situations where you actually were at the mercy of someone else's chaos cycle, where, hey, you're like, I've got sort of my priorities and my plan and whatever, but because this leader or this other person is maybe a little more frenetic, we'll say, like, how did you interact with those situations, or how did you help bring other people along in a way that would sort of serve the church as a whole?
Not easily, and not perfectly.
You don't have any like silver bullets for people that just like do this thing and it will work.
You have to give yourself permission to set some boundaries, and if people keep on overstepping your boundaries, then that goes into being faithful with what you can, but also knowing that might be a cue to say, I can't lead myself in a healthy way here, and so I may need to step out. It's not perfect, but boundaries are going to be the thing that you can just say. Like we talked about calendar. Calendar is not like, you don't want to read a book about calendar stuff. Like it's not fun. But being effective with your time, that's fun. Prioritizing the things you need to, that's fun. So like it's just a necessary thing to know. I gotta be proactive with my calendar and block things off. So for me, it sometimes meant sometimes can be a little bit passive aggressive when the moment requires. So when the knock on the door would happen, say, hey, I need to talk to you about this. We, top priority. I would say, oh, hey, come over. Let me pull up my calendar and let's find a time that we can talk soon. Well, what I'm doing in that moment is saying, hey, I know that your thing is important and I want to say yes to you, but I also need you to know and feel that you are not the only thing going on. And I have to have the wisdom in that moment to know, is this a is this I need to see the doctor, or is this 911? Like, is this a emergency room visit?
Sure.
And sometimes it's that, and you just got to say, hey, let's jump at it. But many times what's urgent is not most important. And so we've got to have the wisdom to say, hey, let's find a time. Hey, it looks like I got an opening on Thursday. Yeah. Now, they may not know that some of those calendar appointments are just a meeting of one. Like, it's just me.
Sure. I like that.
But that doesn't mean, like, think about it for a lead pastor. If you don't prioritize your time to teach in your preparation for teaching, you're not going to be any good on Sunday.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to be able to step in and be able to be faithful with the responsibility that only you have in that moment. So we've got to do the same in our ministries. And sometimes that thing is setting up systems. Sometimes it's meeting and developing volunteers or staff. It's prioritizing the things that only you can do. And so if that's not on your calendar, you're gonna be playing defense all the time and not being most effective with the most important things that you have in front of you.
I like the meeting of one.
Yeah, that's good.
Everybody should have that on their calendar. And I do it now, but I didn't do it for years to block off 3-4 hour chunks in my day. Cause I go, oh, that's a lot of time. But I go, I have to have that time to prepare, to play catch up if I've fallen behind on stuff, and to think into the future and going, hey, here's the things that I want to do in the next month, quarter, year, whatever that looks like. Yeah. And go ahead.
Speaking to that, like, think about it. I'm very visual. So one time I made a box of, I separated a box of like four squares together representing 10 hours of each of my team that had, full time, hoping that let's shoot for 40. And what I did is I kept on making the four boxes and 2 boxes for the part-time folks and stuff like that. And I just stepped back and looked at it. I'm like, oh, that's a lot of boxes that I'm responsible for. And then it was like God nudging me to just block off a little sliver of one of those to say, if you aren't effective with that, everybody in this circle pays the price.
Yes.
Every one of them. And so sometimes we think like, oh, how do I prioritize the meeting of one? It's like, how do you not? Because if you aren't doing that, everybody else is paying the price because they don't have clarity about what the priority is. They aren't on mission and on vision for where they're trying to go together. Like all that stuff falls apart if you aren't leading well in that. So we've got to be able to craft, to carve out the time that we need to be able to say, hey, this sets the tone for everything else.
And I think the more that somebody moves up in the positions in ministry, like I'm sure that when you went from communications director to creative arts pastor, your meeting schedule increased. The amount of meetings that were on your calendar now all of a sudden were instantly, now you're in this meeting or this executive meeting or this blank, 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 blank. And I don't know why that's the case. And maybe I think it should go backwards in some ways. Of the higher you go in an organization, the less meetings you should have, because your team has to be leading, and your ability to coach and lead the team and the staff that's below you. Just like you're saying, if you can't lead with this, how in the world could you leave these, giant boxes of time and people without the clarity that they need? And instead of just sitting in meetings and meetings and meetings. And we joke about it all the time, not being on church staff anymore. Like, oh, praise God, we don't have to sit in meetings literally all day long.
My calendar. What are you talking about?
Well, I'm in meetings all day. I'm in meetings all day too, but it's a different kind of thing now, And I remember just that, not feeling like I had time for my team because I was like running from meeting to meeting to meeting every hour of the day. And I'm like, why are we doing this? This is crazy. But it takes something to completely stop that, to, switch and make a 180. And I think, I guess one of the things that like I'm thinking about and wonder from you, when you go from reactivity to being proactive in the things, like you have to play catch up on all of this reactiveness to eventually get yourself to be ahead, to be proactive. Like, how would you say that people do that, or how do you do that well? Because like I think
select
myself,
every email in your inbox,
delete. I mean, that's a very real thing.
And then
go if they respond, or if they hit me back, then they actually.
I think Matt Wright did that one time.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that. You can do that. I'm not that. I'm an inbox zero person.
Yeah.
My wife is here in the back room as well with us, and I think her email list right now, like mine's at like 7, and I'm a little bit twitchy. Like and I think hers has like 57,000.
Yep, of
right
course.
now. There's two kind of people in the
My
world.
wife is the same. It's totally fine.
Yeah. So you can do that. You can just say, I give up. Declare email bankruptcy and start over.
That's so good. Everybody should do that.
Yeah, it's
I'm gonna do that
feeling.
today.
Go for it, man. Yeah. But so you can do that. I think it's, for me, when I coach creative teams, I think of it in 3 filters to try to help get them from where they are to where they want to be. And it usually is getting your people and your systems and your rhythms aligned. People is obvious. Get them in the right role, in the right seat with clarity of like, what's my 1-sentence job description. Systems, the right people with wrong systems won't work. So you have to have systems for how you operate. So sometimes the issue that you're playing reactive to is because you don't have a system to guide requests or guide how you manage projects together, things like that. So sometimes the thing you got to block off on your calendar is actually, which is what I had to do, is the things that I was spending twice as long as I needed to on was not a people issue. I was the right person in the right seat at that time. It's just I didn't have a system to guide me. And even though I was a team of 1, and that at that point, I still needed systems. Yeah. So it took that getting people and systems, but also the rhythms right of knowing what's the pace and cadence for how I'm going to do meetings, how we work, how we plan, all those things. Like the right systems with the wrong rhythms don't work.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we often forget about is how are we planning ahead, not for the service in 4 days, but the service in 4 weeks. Yeah. How am I leading my team well? How am I leading our ministry well? If I'm just barely trying to play catch up for a couple of days out, that's going to create chaos. Yeah. So I think getting those things in place may mean that you just need to prioritize the time that you have around addressing one of those issues. Yeah. And then start playing offense again. And that may not be, that for me certainly wasn't a 1 weekend process of I'm caught up. Yeah. But it was saying, okay, I have to remember that the work that I do this week, the most important thing I can do is not making that ministry happy. It's building this system. And if I do it right, I won't have to touch it for weeks or months or years even. Yeah. If I do it right here, that's worth the investment. So that might be the case. I don't know what it is for everybody listening, but there's something there that you're like, if you figure this out, it's going to change your ministry.
Well, and that's the thing is it's not just like go pull the playbook off the shelf and it works for every single team, for every department or for whatever. And it is very specific to your church, your context, your culture, your staff, like whatever that looks like and the people that are on it to create systems and processes that work for who you are as a ministry. And I could see, I just think back to so many years of my life that I go, how much time do we waste? Like just not having some of those things in place because Sunday's always coming. It feels like you're making progress because we did another week. We did another Sunday. It's Monday. We did it. Awesome. We survived and it doesn't stop. And so there's this like almost fake thought that like we're moving things forward. And the reality is how much is actually changing or getting better from Sunday to Sunday. It's
funny. I was thinking of, I've been doing one-on-one coaching and team coaching for a lot of years now. And most people, when I first start meeting with them one-on-one, I'm like, hey, where do you want to be at the end of this? And a lot of times it's tactics, it's tools, it's strategies, it's things that are, growing in a talent or a skill, which is great. We all need to be growing and doing that. But the thing that I always force my way into is usually one of our earliest sessions is developing your weekly rhythm. And more often than not, at the end of our time, they look back and they say, hey, that was the biggest game changer that I had of just proactively figuring out how to lead my time. And it just takes some intentionality around that. But that might be the one thing that's holding a lot of us back is that we are letting our schedule run us instead of running our schedule, and prioritizing all the things that we got on our plate and thinking of it more like a budget. We think about budgeting our money, but we should be budgeting our time just as well. Yeah. And that's what can be holding our ministry back sometimes.
And just like you can delay an expense in a budget, like a lot of times you can delay a meeting or 100%. Delay a conversation, with just a little bit of communication and expectation setting. it's actually not that big a deal most times to just, you don't feel like you have to do everything this week, right now, today, immediately.
Or to say, hey, maybe I don't need to have this meeting be 2 hours. Maybe it can be a stand-up meeting in 30 minutes.
Absolutely.
You just save some.
Yeah,
you save some time budget.
Yeah,
right?
It's real time.
That's an interesting exercise. Is review your calendar, take every meeting that you have, and make it half as long, and just see, are you able to accomplish what you need to accomplish in that amount of time?
No doubt.
Well, I think it's and there's so many tools today that there even wasn't pre-COVID. I think of like the Zoom and like the AI assistant, like how incredibly helpful it is. It is to have. If I miss a meeting and somebody hits that little button and then all the people that were in the meeting get emailed the notes of the call and I go, perfect. Here's the
Caleb never shows up to meetings anymore. I don't know what's going on.
I needed to know in that hour-long meeting. And now I don't have to be there. And I have everything that I need just because all of that is, kind of being taken care of. And man, we had some long meetings in church. We had some long 2-hour, 3-hour, 4-hour planning something meetings that I go, how much did we really accomplish? I don't really know, but we felt busy. And feeling busy again, can make people feel like they're getting things done. And I don't know. I like to be busy. I put that on myself and that's a part of my personality. And so that can be just such a false sense of that. So anyways, so when you think of this book today, how different or not is it? You wrote it pre-COVID, not knowing COVID was coming. And you think to today in 2024, what things would you maybe change about it? What things would you be like, hey, this is still applicable or even more applicable today than what it was? And then where do you see, when you think of creative teams, when you think of creative ministry, what things are we doing right and what things are we doing wrong? And the things that you see when you walk into churches all the time and coach people in one-on-one or teams, that are changing or different than they were 4 years ago.
Well, what I'm probably most thankful for and proud of is that I can look back and say, I don't think a whole lot would change.
That's great.
Because the approach of the book was less around, here's what to do on Facebook to grow your engagement by 10%. Yeah. It was more, here's how to fundamentally think about communication and think about messaging to be able to advocate for your audience. So in that way, it's as true then as it is now. Some of the, I don't think I would go back and rethink how I rethink.
That's great.
and still, I'm thankful for that. I think the only thing that I would, if there was a chapter written, though, it's to realize that to push even more for the people reading to know this is not a one-person job. And I put that in there. This is, the tendency that we have in many churches is we think, oh, I have a comm director. They're doing, that's communications is their job. False.
Yeah.
Because communication, everything communicates. So that means communication isn't somebody's job, it's everybody's job. Yeah. And every person has a unique role to play. But I think now when you look at the scope of what it takes to communicate well as a church, we are putting too much pressure on one person to be all things. I mean, every ministry, every role has that at some level. I feel, especially for lead pastors and executive pastors, you naturally have to feel like you're trying to be some like unicorn-ish person that is great at all things, and you're just not going to be that. But the pressure for a comm director, especially, and any creative ministry, video as well, like this creative space, the people just think, well, I have one person. Why, they're 24 out of college. They had a good resume-ish and a decent portfolio. Why aren't they a great web designer and graphic designer and a writer? Why can't they run our social full-time as well? And why aren't they're in all our meetings. Why don't they have, there's this disconnect of this is something that used to be somebody's job, and knowing that we have to look at it in a little bit different way. And that doesn't mean that everybody should just be hiring 5 people, although sometimes that is the answer to invest in it. Yeah. But there are different ways to be able to build out your communication needs and meet the same needs that every church has, whether you're 500 or 5,000 or more, of looking at who are your leaders that are owning and leading the charge and advocating for the audience. Yeah. And then who are the people on your team that are freelancers or contractors or outsourced, you can look at it in a different way that doesn't necessarily have to be somebody else on payroll.
Yes.
But that's a piece that we've got to figure out. And that's one of the top things I'm having to come in to do a lot of times is with a senior leadership team that's like, we cannot figure this area out.
Yeah.
This one person, they're struggling. It's like, yeah, they are, and help to bridge the gap between expectations and reality and help build out what it looks like for that person to be successful, for the church to be successful. Because it's the thing that's handicapping so many churches right now.
Yeah.
It's holding them back from accomplishing their mission because they haven't quite figured out how to invest in this area.
Yeah. The freelance and contractors thing is super interesting because I think there's probably two areas that we see that the most, and it's like production. I mean, just maybe worship stuff too. Definitely worship stuff too, and the amount of contractors or musicians that are coming into play. But comms is an area that I think people underestimate and forget that, like, I can freelance a graphic designer who's way better than me in Canva trying to put something together, who's going to come up with something that's more creative. It doesn't cost that much money. And all of a sudden that relief of not having that on your plate to design a new series, to design every single asset for that series that has to, whether it's for print or lower thirds, or it doesn't really matter. There's 1,000 different things. The ability to sub that out is not that difficult. And same with video, same with, copywriting and web development, all the stuff that does set up a potential one-man team to actually win, without having to hire for, full-time employees on staff of the church that just would never get approved. And so they go, woe is me. I got to do everything by myself. And the reality is like, what other creative ways can we come up with to, support and actually, do that stuff. And so, that's a really, really, really interesting concept too. I think for, you in this space now, and one of the things we were talking about even before we started recording is like, what are the things that you're seeing that aren't working right now when it comes to creative ministry in churches? I think that it's very hard to continue to be creative every single week because there's 52 Sundays in a year. Regardless of, is that right? 52. That sounds right. 52 weeks in a year. So there's 52 Sundays.
That's right. You have a fact check at the end of this?
Yeah, fact check somebody. I need what's the guy on Joe Rogan's podcast? Like, hey, go look that up for me. But I think it's really hard to be creative out of all of those. And I think that I sure thought this, that we had to do something new and we were never allowed to repeat stuff. But I just wonder, like, from your perspective, what do you think works right now in creative ministry, of how churches are doing it or how you're seeing other churches doing it? And then what is like, you beat your head against the wall because you see it every single week in another church doing the same thing, somewhere else.
Well, like you referenced, I'm especially burdened right now by how I see a lot of the way that we're trying to do creative ministry that's just not working, or it's not leading where you want or think it should go and where we need it to go. I mean, the reality is, like, a lot of people feel like, okay, if I get called or step into ministry, that's basically a ticket to burnout because there's just no healthy way to be in that role for a long time, which breaks my heart. Yeah. Like, it shouldn't be that way because I think some of the greatest ministry leaders can and should be in this space, but we aren't. We got to fight for that, in how we lead ourselves, but how also as leaders, how we shepherd and steward this area. But also I think another area that I feel like is not working is, we have the burden of the comparison trap. We're no longer comparing to the church down the road, bigger or smaller. We are comparing to the church that we aspire to be or think we should be across the country. Yeah. With a whole different mission, a whole different set of resources, whole different team, all that stuff. And we suffer through, I think we've created a bar that nobody can hit. And so what it does is we've got leaders that no matter how amazing that service was or how faithful they were to what they felt like God was leading them to do, it still doesn't match up to how good it looked on somebody else's Instagram reel. Yeah. And so then we have this bar that we feel like nobody can reach. And we have the next generation of leaders who, like, I think all of us, we would look back and say, we weren't ready when we had a shot.
No.
Right? Like, not. I mean, there was somebody
took a chance on me.
Somebody took a chance and said, hey, I see this in you and I'm going to have your back even when you screw it up. Yep. when I started in worship. Bless my heart. Like, I was available, and had a guitar. That was the prerequisite.
You didn't list that on your sort of like CV as you were describing your career.
I started in worship, then moved into worship and production because I was the person. So that's and so on. So eventually I was in the room, and because I had a Mac, they're like, hey, you probably should be in the, doing design. Sure, I'll figure it out. But yeah, we are, when we think about the next generation of leaders, how do they even look at what we're trying to do week in, week out when they're trying to be the next fill in the blank, whatever church it is, and say, hey, I'm not there yet. I can't. So I guess I don't have a place to try to learn and explore if lighting could be something that I do, or if communications or storytelling or leadership. It's like, it's because we've raised the bar so high, nobody can hit it. And then we look around and wonder, where's our pipeline of leaders? Why can't we find that next worship pastor? Why can't we find that next executive pastor? Well, we haven't given people a chance to fail, fail forward and fail with support from other people that are saying, hey, I'm going to give you a chance. And I want to coach you, not boss you in those moments to be able to help move you where you need to go. So I think we got to be careful about where we set the bar and not fall victim to the comparison trap on that. And then I think too, the other thing that just breaks my heart is we're still more often looking at creative ministry not as a ministry, but still as a vending machine service department of just make worship happen and tee me up for the message. Or just, I know production, it's just make it look good and sound good. And communications, just churn it out, make sure it just blitz people with marketing, just let them know what's going on, more. And every one of those areas should be ripe for some of the greatest ministry that we have in the church. And if we don't give it permission to be a ministry, it's always going to suffer into being more Kinko's than and a service department than it is a thriving ministry. And that was for me, the biggest light bulb moment for communications was, if I don't think of it like a ministry, nobody else is going to.
Yeah.
If I'm not thinking of it like a ministry, I'm not looking at Facebook or Instagram as a mission field. I'm looking at it as a place to promote. I'm not thinking about storytelling as a place to tell stories of what God's doing in our church. I'm looking at it as a place to write and create announcement videos that play before the service that everybody ignores.
Yeah.
So if we don't think of all these things as ministry opportunities, we are losing out, and our churches are losing out. The people in the back row that are trying to figure out, is this place for me? They're losing out if we aren't thinking of it like that. So I think that takes us leading, not just managing what we're doing. Yeah. It takes us stepping out and to have a fresh vision for putting our priorities in the right place, and not just saying we won because we didn't get in trouble and the pastor didn't call us out, or we were winning because our live stream looked great and people didn't, whatever. I think, for me, I put in the last chapter of my book, and it's still my ministry mission statement, is to put Jesus on display. Because I know there was never going to be a Sunday that I was a part of where everybody was happy and everybody loved every song and the volume was exactly the way everybody wanted it. And every leader was happy that their thing was like that. Perfect Sunday doesn't exist. Yeah. So if that's your mark, you're always going to miss it. But if our mark is just, how do we faithfully put Jesus on display in our service so that he's proud, not anybody else, then that's a target I can try to hit. Yeah. And you can put Jesus on display even with the worship leader that isn't quite ready to be, that you may be a little bit nervous about, that isn't quite the best singer, but has a future, has a chance. I think that makes Jesus proud. Like I think that honors him well. And so that doesn't mean you throw anybody up there. Sure. I'm not saying that, but I think we've set our mark on the wrong place. Yeah. And I think we got to remind ourselves as ministry leaders, our role is to put Jesus on display and let him build our church. Yeah. Because it's not going to be our strategies, our best song, our best lighting. Man. It's going to be that because he said that's his job, not ours.
Yeah. And I think so much of that actually doesn't even happen on Sundays. It's like what we were talking about earlier around, you're putting Jesus on display in the way that you're bringing along that young leader or mentoring them or investing in them, or the way that you're interacting or collaborating with the other ministry leads that are, part of your team. And like so much of that, putting Jesus on display is actually what allows it to shine even better when you get to that Sunday or you get to that event and you're, engaging the congregation, because it started throughout the whole week. Yeah. And, that just I think bears even more fruit in the long term.
Yeah. What are you all seeing? Like from just what are the other traps? Anything else that you feel like, man, that you even run into in the leaders and the creatives that you're talking to?
I mean, man, I think the comparison game is such a dude.
It's huge.
I mean, every conversation is we saw this thing that blank church did, and we want to do that. So how do we do it? Or what gear do we need, or whatever that, that thing is that they need.
Which is good. Like you want to be inspired by
Sure.
all kinds of different creatives all over the place, but then take that and filter it through. How does that look in our context? How does that look like with our team? How does that look like with our mission, our skill set, our facility, like whatever, so that you're able to then not just copy one other church organization, but actually take the best from a whole bunch of them and filter that into something that's unique and distinct for your church that's benefiting from all of those different expressions.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's no different than reading a book and taking the things out of whatever book you're reading and going, hey, I see how this could be very applicable to my team. And it's easy for us to take that out of a book and do that, but it's very hard for some reason for us to look at Instagram or another church's website or a live stream and go like, oh, I'm just going to pick a piece out of this that I like. They go, I want all of those things. I mean, gosh, I think back to those first weeks in COVID. I remember texting friends at churches across the country. I'm like, man, I'm watching your stream at Red Rocks and it looks freaking amazing. I wish that we could do, and I was asking questions and all this stuff. And there was so much of this comparison game that, just like social media is for anybody, and looking at people and their perfect lives or whatever they have. And we're doing the same thing, watching a perfect live stream of some giant church with 1,000 staff and tons of money, or way more money than what we have, to do something. And I just go, man, when you know those people though, you also go, they got the same issues, man. They just maybe have another zero at the end of this budget, that I don't have. So I think the comparison game is just such a enormous thing of chasing that. And I think, when it comes to the creative space, and we've talked about this before in other episodes, like, I think in a good way, people are starting to look outside of church for inspiration and creativity, whether it's going to a concert or going to a conference or an event or something that isn't ministry related, to go, what are the things out of this context, this event, this thing that I saw that we can use to make this fantastic. If a church is only looking at another church to figure out marketing strategy, go look at Chick-fil-A and Coca-Cola instead to get some ideas of how to market really well, because they're spending billions on things like that versus only looking at the church down the street of trying to just be better than them.
I think another thing I see often is it sort of builds on that, but it's a team or a leader who's, instead of looking at how do I steward what I'm doing right now and take the next right step and like build in an incremental way, the mindset becomes, how do I jump 10 steps down the road?
Yes.
And so there's this sort of I want to make a big move or a big change or a big hire or a big something. And it's like, that's cool. But the people that have gotten to wherever you're envisioning, they all did it incrementally and step by step and failure by failure and day by day. And if you can't steward the next small thing or the boring stuff or the fundamentals of whatever you're doing, you can't then steward the big thing down the road because you don't have those pieces in place. And the reality is, the journey that it takes to get to whatever there is a year from now or 5 years from now, in reality, it's going to lead you to probably a different place anyway.
Exactly.
As you have those experiences, you realize I thought it was going to look like this, but actually it's so much cooler. It actually looks like this. As we've grown the team and had experiences together and, things have evolved, it's like, wow, I never could have seen where this is going to end up 5 years from now if I had just teleported forward in time. And so you just miss out on opportunity.
We do that as churches, but we also do it as leaders. We find somebody or something that we say, that's what I want it to look like. And I think what I often find is when we do that, we spend years building a house that we don't actually end up wanting to live in. We end up wanting to be that church or that kind of leader, but also then feel the pressure of, I'm being somebody that I'm not. and I'm not wired that way. I'm not gifted that way of that person. And now I feel the pressure of trying to do that, or a team to be able to do that with different resources, whatever it is.
Yeah.
We build a house we don't want to live in, you know, and we gotta be mindful of that. And I think too, even what you hit, like I see this all the time of, we are so drawn by, you know, the church across the country doing it that way, that we miss out on the uniqueness of what God wants to do in each individual church.
100%.
I mean, there's not one cure-all, like there's not one, like there's many interpretations of what the church can look like, because I think every region, every place is different.
Totally.
And so, I mean, I know you have seen it. I see it all the time of like, oh, I know what, you can see a pastor preach and be like, oh, I know who they're influenced by. Or I can see a you know, creative team. You're like, oh, I know who they listen to. And you look in the back row of the person with their arm crossed and you're like, okay, they're trying to do this, but that person is not attracted to that. They're not connecting to that. So they're being, you know, drawn to their vision of what success looks like, but they're not being faithful to the people that God's called them to minister to.
Yeah.
And they're, you know, what good is that?
Yeah. And I think you do that so well. I mean, I remember years ago, you talking to me about your process of writing this book and going, sit in a Starbucks or coffee shop and think about the people that are sitting around you and going, how would they, even if you don't know them, want to interpret or hear this message if it's applicable to their lives? And you're saying the same thing of looking in the back row. And it sounds so simple, but like it's very, very easy. And exactly what you're saying is I'm chasing Red Rocks, or when John Clark was still there, you know, as a production guy, and going, I want to do those things. But I go, do the things that they're doing in their church in Littleton, Colorado, make sense for what we were trying to do in Grays Lake, Illinois?
Yeah.
Maybe not. I don't know.
But it's a question you have to ask. You can't just
it's a question you have to ask.
it.
Yeah, you cannot
it's a filter.
just, exactly. And I think social media, all of these things has made it so influential to us to go, these are the things that I'm chasing. And the reality is like all these staff are just chasing the aspirations of what another staff person or another leader or influential person in another church is doing. And then we're going, I just want to copy that playbook to be like
if there were more meetings of one, then maybe you would have time to kind of reflect and come up with something.
I mean, man, it's, you know, I think back years ago when I left church, and 2 weeks after I had left, I left on July 30th. And I think on the 14th of August, I went to a week at Refuge in Wyoming, which you were there a couple weeks before me and not even knowing. And that time was very special and very quiet for myself, and a little bit too quiet for some days, to the point where, you know, I had my phone on airplane mode because there's no service at all. And I was telling myself that it was in my pocket to take pictures, but the reality was it was there to make me feel better about like not being scared to not have my phone. But those 5 days after made me really sit and think and go, man, are there things that I would have done differently, or what would I have done differently in ministry? I just left 2 weeks ago, and I'm at this long table with 25 other senior executive leaders in churches all across the country. And I'm going, I felt so much guilt sitting at that table. Number one, because I left church. Number two, because of the things that I would have done differently if I would have taken space 6 months prior to look into myself and spend time alone and go, is this where God is, you know, am I doing the work that God is calling me into, number one? And number two, am I doing it for my team in the way that, you know, God is calling me into? And I remember sitting at that table last night and go, and I said, if I would have came here 6 months ago, I'd still be in church. No question.
Wow.
And it's still where God, you know, had me at that season, and God knew that I was going to go to Refuge and think that and say that out loud to a group of people 2 weeks after I left. But man, the internal looking at yourself and going, am I doing what God has, you know, called me to do? And am I doing it in a way that's healthy? Sometimes takes a break to, you know, from reality to do that. And there's a lot of churches, man, who give, like we used to get solitude days I think it was once a month. I did not use those solitude days the way that they were intended. I used them as an extra day off a month. And going, hey, I'm taking my, you know, solitude day on Thursday to, you know, get me an extra long couple of days leading into the weekend. And man, I wish that I would have done those things differently, you know, and just go, I should have spent 4 hours of that writing and journaling or whatever that looks like, so that I could lead ministry better. So I think,
just like you and just like everybody else, I mean, we don't have a perfect track record of faithfulness, but God doesn't waste reps in our life. Like I can look back for the things that I can see of moments that I thought were just brutal or a miss, and see the faithfulness of God through all of it.
Yeah.
Like my first couple of years in full-time ministry were rough. Like, and this wasn't at Westridge, this was before. And I look back and just at some level cringe of some of the challenge of the environment, but also some of the cringe for myself of like, oh my goodness, like what was I doing? What was I thinking? But the burden that I have now for serving creatives was birthed in that moment.
Yeah.
And even when I was not, at my best, God was doing his best work in me to be able to draw the burden towards things that he was going to do later. So, we don't have a perfect track record, but God does, and he's going to use all that stuff that we jack up and mess up in our journey.
And that's the thing. He will still use it. And he, just like he used David and he used anybody else in the Bible to go, his work was still being done through those people. And I truly do believe, even like I was mentioning earlier, and all the articles you read or things you'll hear about churches and leaders that make mistakes, I go, man, God is still using those people and still use those people. I was listening to the episode that came out today. Sometimes I don't listen back to the episodes and I go, was that good or not? I don't know. But Adam Skidmore, was talking about, and he came from Harvest Bible Chapel and James McDonald and all of this incredibly messy stuff that happened years ago. But he said, he's like, man, God was still doing incredible things in that season. Even though it was like, we didn't realize some of it was toxic. Like there were still people giving their lives to Jesus and people were coming to know Jesus because of the work they were doing, even through all of that mess. And I truly believe to my core that is still the case, in so many churches across the country and the world.
Well, I can't remember when we were walking through my step out of full-time ministry into a different season of ministry. And God was doing a lot of work in me months and a year plus before to prepare me for that. And I kept on thinking, oh man, God's going to use this for somebody else that I get to talk to or work with. And God was doing that in me. And I remember doing a study of Hebrews 11. It's the, heroes of the faith chapter. And actually did a talk at Westridge with our men's ministry around this of just the reality of don't play it safe and live a story worth telling. Yeah. Because when you look at Hebrews 11, it's the heroes of the faith. And looking back, I just did a quick study of each person as I read through that. And you see the words by faith, by faith. Abraham did this by faith. Moses did this. And you look back at all their stories, and what just jumped off the page for me was they didn't play it safe. They didn't, because every one of them had to take a step into the unknown, into something that they weren't ready for, prepared for, or that's something that took them way, way out of their comfort zone into a land unknown, or something, or something that they weren't ready to carry. And by faith, they became the heroes of the faith because of their step of faith. Yeah. And often in our journeys, we look at conflict, troubles as a sign of, we got to get out, like get us out, I need to move to the next thing, or God can't be on this because it's not going perfect or whatever. It's like, actually we're often robbing ourselves of looking for the safe story instead of realizing that God doesn't want us or our families or us in ministries to play it safe. Yeah. Like by faith, when we know on our best day, we don't have it, but by faith, we're asking you, God, be faithful to us as you always have, as we take this step of faith. And doing so, we're going to live stories worth telling. Yeah.
I love that, man. As we're kind of wrapping up, for anybody that wants to, number one, read this book, we're going to find it. How do they get in contact with you? Like what resources or things could you, kind of share with anybody listening to, find this stuff out?
I appreciate it. Yeah, you can, the book's on Amazon and that's where everybody gets their books anyway. So all versions there you can check out, and I hope it's valuable. What I told you is what I really tried to write it from is picturing a lead pastor, a ministry leader, and a communications or creative leader around a Starbucks.
Yes.
Or someplace better, even though I've got Starbucks here with me today. You get the idea, like sitting around just trying trying to work together to help solve their communication issue, because everything communicates.
Yeah.
So that hopefully that can be a resource to people. And then just my website, philbowdle.com, Bowdle. Go there and get resources on one-on-one coaching if that's a need. Or a lot of some of my favorite stuff I get to do right now is ministry assessments, where a leader is like, hey, something's broken. I don't even know what or how to fix it. But we know we're off track somewhere. And the joy of my life is being able to work with executive leaders and creative leaders to help get them on the right path and moving together. So love doing that as well. Yeah.
And you're great at it. I was telling him before you came in, I was like, man, I have copied my assessments from the way that Phil did it. And the first time we did it down in Dallas, years ago, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. Like I'm copying all of these things and I still use it today. So thanks.
Love it. That's awesome, man.
Because man, it's so needed. And so many churches like just don't know what they don't know, and bringing in somebody from the outside and a third party perspective to go, take it or leave it, man. Here's just the things I see. I'm going to sleep great at night if you don't do any of them, or if you use all of them. It's great. And so I love that you're doing that. And thanks for being here and spending time with us.
Sharing your story.
Absolutely, man.
I know there's a lot of challenging and encouraging things, I think, in there for the people listening to wrestle through, and hope it leads to some good action steps.
Well, thank you all for creating a safe space for these conversations too. Because this is, it's definitely not playing it safe to be in ministry.
No,
and
it's
so
not.
to have conversations like this is a gift.
Yeah.
It's been a gift to me, your podcast already.
Yeah,
and
thanks, man.
hopefully this can be a gift to somebody else that's like trying to figure this thing out and stuff. So love it.
Yeah.
Grateful for you guys.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Thanks.
Till next time.